Welcome to another Sunday Superversive Livestream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and today I'm with my good co host, Anthony Marquetta, and I'm also with my good friend, David Halquist, who has been on this show a couple of times. Now, our goal today is to talk about the need for religion in science fiction. Quite frankly, godless atheists have taken too much out of the setting of sci-fi, and it has quite frankly ruined quite a few works that would otherwise benefit from a level of the spiritual. This has been going on pretty clearly since post Campbell period. Heinlein, Asimov, and Burroughs, and uh, not Edgar Rice Burroughs, William C. Burroughs. Uh, what was the other one? Clark.
Mark,
Yep, were godless. Even if Heinlein may have said he was some sort of Episcopalian, he certainly wrote like he was godless and dominated by his lusts, especially towards the end. Uh, this has created a sort of tension in sci-fi where authors who are, quite frankly, mostly themselves atheist or atheist leaning, or some form of libertarian, which is also fairly atheistic in its thinking at a base level, are unable to handle religion in their works with any particular um, with any particular success. And my argument is going to be today that religion is in fact entirely necessary for a living, breathing world, even beyond the yeah we have souls so we got to be spiritual, man. No, I mean organized religion across the stars. Yes, that is right. I am arguing for Catholic space papism, a universal church in a literal sense. Yes, you hear it here. And before my pastor throws me in it's like one of those Jesus underwears that the Mormons wear, except it's a straitjacket. I will expound on this. Uh, and I'll give my thesis for it now. The basic idea that I'm putting forth is that space travel, especially any space travel that is not pure hyperdrive, that is faster than light, and even with hyperdrive, requires a religious devotion to maintaining society. That is to say, that the people who run society must have some sort of religious devotion, keeping their kingdoms, their empires cohesive in ways that a secular society provably cannot. Good example from our own history. Uh, every maritime empire that has ever been has been religious. The reason why Christianity has expanded the way it does has been with two hands, commerce and religion. They created empires for commerce, and they found out about those empires because of missionaries, those kingdoms to fight and meet and whatnot, because of missionaries. It is very telling that Hernan Cortez and others who took over the Aztec kingdoms were themselves very religious men, or they were very bloodthirsty men who happened to keep a cadre of monks around them, monks and priests and such. Oftentimes, some of the first buildings they would build were a church. One can also look at things like the ideas of chivalry in the Middle Ages. These were people who lived in geographical dead zones with who knows how many bandits between them and the next batch of civilization. While I do not believe in the myth of the Dark Ages, I also very clearly want to state that Rome was better than the gap between Rome and Charlemagne. And I don't mean that in the sense of, they were godless heathen, didn't have writing or anything like that. I just mean it in the sense of every man's sword was against each other. If you read the history of the Merovingians, their history is written in blood and incest. Murders are constant. They always lusted after their brother's lands and goods. You cannot tell me that that environment created a better civilization um, than either Charlemagne or Rome. But what brought them together was a religious devotion that underpinned their empire building. So that when Charlemagne took control, it was not just that he took control in a atheistic vacuum, that he had no backing, that he had no love of God, but rather that he had a religious incentive, a desire, an absolute spirit to him, beyond just being chosen as a great man, to maintain the kingdom that he had taken. In this way, you can see it in the Muslims as well, and in certain respects to the Japanese and the Chinese, though the religion and the state are not really separate. Therefore, as we can see in our own times, that all countries, all empires are kept together with a undercurrent of religion. Um, One must also expand that out to star systems. Indeed, interstellar trade is impossible with simply a monetary incentive. There is always an incentive, for money and all this jazz. But the amount of danger that comes with space travel, if you're an atheist, either the rewards must be great enough to justify your potential extermination at the hands of a meteor or a black hole or who knows what have you, um, but also because, uh, hold on, justified by money. Uh, what was I? Hold on, I just lost. I just bubbled in my own thoughts. So an atheist only has the promise of money that keeps him going, but also he has to trust that the people on the other side will not simply kill him and take his goods. That can happen quite a few times before people catch on. Uh, it took quite a bit of time for the pilgrims to the Holy Land to be killed by those who ruled it prior to the Crusades, before people caught on and discovered what was going on. Therefore, what can make a man trust that the orbital lasers, which will catch his light sail and slow him down in time to, land safely upon the space dock, will greet him as a friend and brother, and indeed be devoted to the idea that those people must come in safely. Well, a common religion. If we cannot, of course, there are other things that can help. For example, bloodlines. If you have clans of people who go from place to place, you have some clan brothers at this place, and you have some clan brothers at that place. But the thing is, that opens up to inter-clan warfare. There must be something bigger than blood. Or consider things like education or a eunuch class. Well, it only goes as far as it goes until the eunuchs decide to take power for themselves, which happened in every empire that they ever were used in. Sure, there is a benefit. These men are not as ambitious as you might expect, but what happens is that there are still the power struggles. The only difference is that it's a power struggle of poison and not of armies, at least at first. Well, okay then. If clan warfare and eunuchs can't be trusted, what then about robotic servitors? Well, that has its own problem. First, who repairs them, and second, who programs them? You might say, well, there's a central authority. Well, then you would have an answer of by what standards do those central authorities follow? If we take the central authority that we live under now, they could look through a brave space captain's Twitter thread and then be like, I don't know, that's problematic, and cause an issue of some kind that could lead to his death or the destruction of his goods, which is very much possible in the maddened state that we live in today. We see now that we cannot trust that our canals and our sea lanes can remain open. And there were quite a few months before they started to deal with the Houthis, and I don't even think they're done dealing with them yet, though nobody seems to be talking about them right now. One remembers what happened when Evergrande uh, blocked the Gaza Canal. Um, you know, we take these real things, and it's a part of a broken down society. Uh, what then is a much longer lasting set that can be trusted to maintain a certain amount of dedication to the job? Unironically, monks, space orbital laser monks, which will work, of course, until you have a Julius II or Julian II or something like that. A battle pope in battle armor. But that took 1,000 years to get there, 1,000 something years. It'll be fine. It'll be all right. Don't worry about it. Uh, if there isn't a empire in the way of Rome, which we are not, there is nobody to build these grand things except for trade. Then, once you have these space orbital lasers, these things, for example, if since we're not using hyperdrives, these things are space lasers. They have an immense amount of power, and they can be used as weapons. The people who own them and who fire them, and the machines who own them and fire them, must be dedicated to not using them as weapons, because they can be used as weapons, and they have an infinite power source of whatever star they're orbiting around. And if you think that they cannot be used as weapons, then you don't know human nature. uh, these brave space captains, if they are to throw themselves between the stars, taking trade and goods and people wherever they go, they must be sure that the berth is there, and the berth is more or less the same as it was before. How to do this? Well, we know that personal ambition ruins even the most common and holy men, but systems in place that can stop it can provide longevity before disasters take place. And the one that has the longest amount of longevity is religion, specifically Christianity. Though the Muslims were very adept traders, I'm sure that they wouldn't do too badly themselves, provided they are not on the jihad path. Gentlemen, what do you say to my thesis?
Ben, I want to read this series when you write it.
I don't know.
I am all up for it. Yeah. Even today, we're seeing societies that abandon God or the gods of their ancestors as even the cases where they don't have didn't have a Christian basis when they abandon that and say turn to atheistic socialism or something. You see corruption set in that would never have happened, never been permitted, because under an atheistic regime, it's your own character and your own the state's ability to physically monitor someone. There's no understanding that one is ultimately paying the penalty for violating the will of heaven, however it's conceived of. And so the corruption, the slacking off, the independent interest with a time horizon that stretches 20 years maybe, or maybe to your next generation at max, and thus through nepotism seems to take hold entirely. So, yeah, I not only don't think that a religious society would not get to space, I don't think they'd be able to maintain the current level of technology from the kinds of weird industrial accidents I keep hearing about from around the world.
It's true.
Yeah. So when I think of religion and society, the thing that I think of is I don't. I'm trying to think of how to put this. Nothing is new under the sun is how I would put it. So you go back to ancient Rome and you go, okay, so the Romans had the gods, right? They had the cult of the gods. What a lot of people don't realize is the difference between the Roman cult of the gods and Christian religious systems that followed, right? Specifically. So, what I mean is something like this. First off, much like is like almost the case today in society, though it's not quite as direct and admitted, the higher ups in Roman society, the elite, if you will, what we would consider the elite of Roman society, men like Cicero, right,
Mm.
did not believe in the gods very openly. In fact, it
Yep.
would have been considered ridiculous if they did believe in the gods. They would have been laughed at by other elites if they admitted that the gods were real. What they did believe was that belief in the gods was important, right? They believed it was important for controlling people, for keeping order, for, like they had this general idea that, oh, faith in some sort of thing, although I don't know if they would have called it faith. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Uh, but what we would think of as faith, right? In
Mm-hmm.
some sort of religious system was important for the public order, right? However, if you were in the know, right? Like if you were an elite, one of the higher ups, it would be like obviously you don't believe in any of those god nonsense, right? And they would go, "No, of course not." Right? That's
Right.
ridiculous.
They wanted
Uh
themselves to be God.
yes, there's that. I
This
am
actually
not.
sounds very familiar.
Yeah, exactly, it does. The only difference between now and then is that in Roman society, it was admitted outright amongst the elites. In modern society, it's all just kind of quiet, if that makes sense. Although it is possible, I suppose, it is possible that it's more out out in the open in those meetings
Mm.
that we are not privy to. But I don't know that. I'm just speculating, right?
Right.
Uh, what's the famous meeting? Wendigoon talked about it, I believe, in Lore Lodge. The famous
Bohemian
meeting
Grove.
with the giant owl statue.
Yeah, Bohemian Grove.
Thank you. Yeah, like Bohemian Grove. Yeah, I imagine that the Roman elite was a lot like that. But when you
Yeah.
get to the Christian
Well, at
empires,
least by the time they were becoming an empire in truth and not just, the beginnings of one. There's very clear signs that in times of like the Punic Wars that they were genuinely religious, especially when they would put their wars on hold to perform religious sacrifices.
yes, yeah, I would agree. Uh, the other thing too is that none of this is as it's not as universal as you think. Like basically, if you wanted to be one of the elites in Roman society, you needed to do two things: publicly announce the importance of worship of the gods, and privately say that you don't believe in them. Now,
Didn't they,
with that said, what was that?
especially the senatorial class,
Yeah,
place a big stock in also like ancestor worship?
Yeah.
That they had to earn the honor of their predecessors and all of this.
Yes,
uh,
but
I'm
it's
not sure.
also you have to understand that each one of them, from the Grecians to the Romans, had a certain uh, Luciferian pride to them. They believed that they could become gods. You think of everyone who ever became quote unquote a god. Pretty much every emperor, except for like Domitian, because they hated him, uh, were became gods after their deaths. Um, a few of them, like Caligula and Elagabalus, the real crazy ones, believed that they were gods in life. Uh, Others, like Alcibiades, clearly, had the whiff of the Ubermensch about them. Their goals were sort of selfish ambition more than anything. Like it, except like, how do I want to put it? Like there's, and I'm still struggling with this because I've been thinking about this. Uh, it's that balance between selfish ambition, playing the game, and taking the opportunities where they lie. Uh, yeah, I think that's kind of the best way to describe it, even though it doesn't satisfy me.
Yeah, so first, there's also a couple other points here. Like, for example, I am not sure that if that Roman class I was talking about didn't believe in God at all. Like, I don't know if they were outright atheists. You have to remember that the idea of an Aristotelian prime mover was around. Like, the distinction between God and the gods 100% existed, right? Like,
Right.
people think it was a modern thing that was introduced by Christianity. It absolutely was not. Socrates acknowledges it. Aristotle acknowledges it, right? Like,
Right.
and the educated Roman class probably would have been aware of it, right? Almost certainly.
Yeah.
Like, this is one of those things that people will sometimes bring up almost to discredit Christianity. Like, oh, they made up, this distinction between, capital G God and the gods. Christianity did not make it up. It is a very ancient distinction,
Yep.
right? Like, it has always been acknowledged. Actually, the interesting, what you might call innovation of Judaism, is that it directed worship towards the one above all, right? That other religions would see as almost beyond worship, right? The
Yes.
Jews said that we are going to worship the God that is above the other gods, the unmoved mover, right? As if he has a personal relationship with us. Other religions, like Roman paganism, would acknowledge that such a god could be proven to exist through Aristotelian logic, right?
Hmm.
Because the educated class knew about Aristotle. Aristotle absolutely argues for this,
Mm-hmm.
right? He absolutely argues for this. But they would never have been able to connect the dots between, okay, and this is a personal being that is owed our worship, right? It was almost a deistic sort of unmoved mover uh, idea. Like Aristotle, I think, doesn't really believe in the gods per se, but he does believe in an unmoved mover, right? He absolutely acknowledges that God exists. He also believes that the soul is immortal, for
Right.
that matter, right? He just questions the existence of the Greek pantheon
He,
specifically.
he basically went as far as you could go with just logic, but it,
Yeah, he
it
did.
demonstrates a lot of what Paul says, where everyone kind of knows, right? Like there was the Great Spirit amongst the natives here, even though few actually worshipped him. The Hindus have an idea of a god being, although it's not complete from the Christian standpoint. There's this
Yeah, Hinduism as well acknowledges,
awareness, right?
right. They acknowledge that there's a kind of one above all sort of thing, so which is the Marvel term for God as well. But whatever.
You
Not that
ruined it,
that's
Anthony. You
I
ruined
know.
it.
That's not actually why I was calling it that though. But
I know.
anyway,
I know.
that's neither here nor there. My point is, when you get to the Christian era, right, this changes substantially, right? Like in the Christian era, when you're in the middle of Christendom and you have these Christian kingdoms, the Christian kings were expected to actually believe in the religion, right?
Yes.
In the heart of Christendom. Now, eventually, of course, this changes, right? Corruption seeps in. It's the inevitability of mankind. It's inevitable in mankind that corruption will seep in.
Yep.
Right?
You think it's
But
pride that does this, or
yeah,
greed, or what is
the
it that
devil.
Yeah.
um right.
Like.
Well, there are three classical. You're right. There are three classical things that Paul addresses that will cause this. And it's the world, the flesh, and the devil. Right?
Hmm.
It's the weakness of humans inherently. It is the world around us tempting us, and it's the devil influencing events. So eventually, Christendom was bound to fall. But when you have Charlemagne, for example, Charlemagne has always been one of my favorite historical figures. He's worthy of a great man stream one day, for sure. He's also one of the few great
Please.
men I consider genuinely saintly. Uh, not perfect. He isn't saintly in the sense of like, we've had this discussion where I distinguish great men and saints. Like Maximilian Kolbe is a saint, but he's not a great man. Saint Teresa of Lisieux, is a saint, but is not a great person, right? Great.
Right.
Well, I'll use great man. We're not woke here. Great man, because man could also mean human in the right context, which is what we're talking about.
I mean,
Right.
yeah, what Charlemagne managed to do almost makes me think of stuff like Arthur and things like that. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
So yeah, I'd
and
be
you're
totally
correct.
down for that sometime.
Charlemagne was not only it was not only a glorious conqueror, the greatest conqueror that Europe had seen in many a year, uh, but he was also a true believer in the faith. The thing that I admire about Charlemagne is that, given his position, he had every opportunity to take over the nascent Christian, the relatively new. Like, when Charlemagne was around, the church wasn't actually that old on a historical scale, and it certainly wasn't that powerful yet, right? Charlemagne had an army. He absolutely could have taken over Rome, conquered it, right? He could have done whatever he could have done what he wanted, and he didn't, because he was a true believer. He also stopped his conquering at a point where he thought he had secured Christendom properly, and started building churches and universities, right? Like, at the point where he said, I believe that the bounds of Christendom are safe, right? I am going to stop, and then I'm going to build churches and things. He had disputes with the Pope throughout his reign. Absolutely, he did. It's not like the Carolingian dynasty and Charlemagne himself and the Pope were not always in lockstep. However, it is notable that in his disputes with the Pope, he always disputed with him not militarily. He never threatened the Pope. He would dispute him like theologically. For example, in the early days of the Filioque controversy, right? The very early days of it happened under Charlemagne. Charlemagne's men wrote a defense of the Filioque, and in the early days, the Pope declined to take it out of to add it. The Pope declined to add it to the Nicene Creed, citing that he didn't want to. And there's lots of debates over, was he saying that you absolutely couldn't, or was he just saying that he wouldn't add it at that point for whatever reason, right? Whatever, I don't care. I'm not discussing I'm not discussing the Filioque controversy right now. I'm just making the point that Charlemagne disputes with the Pope, but he does not dispute the Pope by threatening the Pope. He disputes the Pope by having his theologians, like his court theologians, basically write like a counter encyclical, yeah, trying to dispute the points that the Pope has made. Uh,
Right.
so I believe that Charlemagne was genuinely he was a man who was a true believer in his faith, right? Like, he really believed in uh Christianity, in the Catholic faith specifically at the time, which was his variety of it. They did have it. Now, Catholicism was not the only game in town at the time. The Eastern churches did exist. Uh right, the Eastern Orthodox Church was absolutely around at the time that Charlemagne was alive. There's even an oft-discussed and fascinating historical what-if in the proposed marriage between Charlemagne and the Empress Irene. Uh, this probably, like, Charlemagne proposes the marriage to try and unite the two empires. Is one of the fun. It is a fun historical what-if in the world stage. In reality, it would have been a horrible idea for Irene to accept, because her people never would have accepted their empress marrying a barbarian. Uh, so it probably would have been an absolute disaster if it actually happened. But it's fun to think of
Hmm.
uh, how close we were to a united Roman Empire once again. But yeah, that's my point. When you get to Christendom, they were true believers in the religion for a long time, right? Under that empire, the kings were true Christian kings. Even when they fragment into various states with the Holy Roman Empire, only one of them, They are still believers in the Christian faith. The papacy does end up getting its own army and growing and turning into the Papal States in what was probably a net negative for the faith at the time. Uh, but nevertheless, they were believers, and things start to change again when you get people who first are like, well, it might be good. Like, think of Napoleon, right? Was Napoleon a true believer in the Christian faith? I would argue that Napoleon was probably somewhere closer to the Cicero side of things, right? Where he did not want to directly antagonize the Catholic faith. He was wary of doing it because he knew that they still held some power, if nowhere else, in the hearts and minds of his people. Uh, but I doubt that he himself had any love for Catholicism
It's true.
or Christianity generally. Catholicism just being the one that was most popular in France at the time. Yeah.
Right. Well, no, he I can't remember if he was purely atheist or not. But there's that famous scene where he crowned himself. Um,
Yes. And Charlemagne, or sorry, Charlemagne, Napoleon, Ridley Scott just came out with a movie that, from my understanding, is an absolute hatchet job. Uh,
oh
I
yeah.
do not know. Yeah, I don't know for sure. I
I
heard some weird things when it came out, but I heard it's bad. And I did some more preliminary research into Napoleon, and he absolutely fits the bill of that category of person we were talking about, of a great man but not a good man. Fascinating historical figure. If there's anyone he reminds me of more than anyone else, actually, he makes me think a little bit of Hannibal, in that he accomplished tremendous things, truly like one of a kind feats that no one else in history could possibly have accomplished, but ultimately died a failure because he was fighting impossible battles. Yeah, things like that.
Yeah.
Uh,
But
but
let's
he was an incredible person.
and this sort of thing, creates a great deal of longevity within, the nation that these people live in. Not the conflicts per se, but the fact that there is a continuance of thought and ideas throughout these people. Charlemagne, let's say that there was an Charlemagne equivalent who unites some star systems together. While there will always be conflict in human pride and ambition, one could trust, like one could trust within his empire, that the ports will remain open, that there is a certain amount of law in the land, that there is stability, and that there is a universally agreed on stability. Even if there are arguments with the Byzantine system over there, there would still be that same sort of stability that would allow trade, except in certain times when there aren't. For example, the massacre of the Latins. Uh, I saw some weird posting about the massacre of the Latins. It's like, people should get angry about this. It's like, buddy, that was 1,000 years ago. I have no idea why you're even bringing it up. Uh, Basically, the Byzantines chimped out and killed like 10,000 Latins within Constantinople.
Well, yeah, what you need to understand is that, for especially like in the Orthodox in that area of the world, grudges run incredibly deep.
Oh yeah.
Like, legitimately, I have heard Orthodox priests say today that they still, like, on YouTube videos, like, well known, like Father Josiah Trenum, I believe his name is, like, well-known Orthodox priests basically say outright that one of the main reasons that they believe that reconciliation with Rome is impossible is because of the Crusaders' massacre, or sack of Constantinople, in the Fourth Crusade, which is, like, to me, just an absolutely stunning comment of, like, are you serious right now?
Yes.
But they are, like, dead serious about this. They're like, yeah, that's, that prove that we weren't one. It's like, well, yeah, but that ignores so many things. Like, for one thing, it's what, 1,000 years ago. Uh, for another, it's like I feel like we could have moved on by now, right? Like, I understand it was quite bad, But
Yeah.
the other thing too is that the whole thing is a complete mess. To you, and Orthodox love to bring this up as like something against Rome. And don't get me wrong, the sack was absolutely morally reprehensible. Like it was an evil
Right.
action, inexcusable in every sense of the word. I wouldn't even dare, like anybody who would dare to defend it, I would immediately call to task. Right? There is no defense of the evil that they did to Constantinople. With that said, it ignores a lot of the context around it. Like, for example, that this was not sanctioned by the Pope in any sense of the word. The
Right.
Pope did not know that it happened. When the Pope learned about it, he immediately excommunicated them. Uh, like this idea that it really had anything at all to do with the east-west divide is honestly strange. Now, I understand why it did at the time, right? At the time, of course, you just associate them, right, with the
Mm.
west and the west coming in doing it. But with 1,000 years of hindsight behind us to view the situation objectively, I don't really get how you're able to use this as like, remember that time Rome betrayed us? And we're like, buddy, Rome had nothing to do with that. Like Rome was not in favor of it. And
Right.
if we ever were, I assure you that we are certainly not now. Uh right? Like even if that's what you were worried about. Like
Right.
grudges in that time run very deep, and you will occasionally see, like you said, the massacre of the Latins. Like you'll occasionally see Latins sort of try and respond in kind. Like they'll go, "Oh yeah, well you're mad about the sack of Constantinople. Well, how about this historical event that everyone's forgotten?" You know, and
Right.
they'll kind of try and one up, which I think is a very unhealthy way to go about it.
Oh yeah.
Like that's really, really
It's
a wrong-headed approach to me.
it's not good for interstellar trade. It isn't, Anthony.
See, this is making me think of a common topic on the show, admittedly, but I think worth discussing. Legend of the Galactic Heroes again, and
Sure.
in Legend of the Galactic Heroes, one of the, in my opinion, the biggest weakness of Legend of the Galactic Heroes is that being created by a Japanese man, the one aspect of the picture of like empire building and, intergovernmental politics that was missing was religion. Because
Yes.
the Japanese really do not understand how religion interacts. And if it was presented in a fully Japanese way, that would be one thing, but he was clearly making it parallel to like European powers, right? Which I think causes some problems in the fact that religion basically was not part of it at all, except for the weird terrorist cult with the terrible name that kills young Wen Li at the end. Oh, spoilers! It's like 30 years or 40 years old or something.
Right. There was. I
But
I agree with you. While sometimes there were vague references, or at least references to degeneracy and stuff like that, you could say that maybe they were, because it was very clear that the common people were backwards and degenerate, that there had been a crisis of faith that had stuck in, like in times when, for example, Renaissance Italy, not including the Papal States, but sometimes including the Papal States, where people might have been, devoted to saints' relics and stuff like that. But you can't look at the weird infighting and, struggle with each other and say that they were acting like good Christians. There's always a demand for, religious motivation, but when when it goes out, it goes out. there's a
On
there's a story where this famous artist died, and somebody took a bunch of candles from a cathedral and stuck it on his grave and said he was more worthy of the prayers, and he was not censured or punished for it. Like there's plenty of stories like that, not counting the whims and murders of the people who ruled them.
going out to the Galactic Empire or future space society, real or imagined, that we may have, we have many that, while there are atheistic conceptions of it, there are many where, even if the authors themselves were not religious men, realize the fundamental facet that religion plays.
Mm.
Particularly Dune comes to mind since it's out at the moment. And it takes a very cynical view of religion, but it doesn't deny that it would be pervasive in a society holding it together. You have people reading their Orange Catholic Bible, and you have the Missionora Protectiva. And I'm reasonably sure Frank Herbert had a horrible experience with nuns in a Catholic school at one point because the Bene Gesserit are kind of terrifying.
It's true.
But the whole thing is dripping with religion all the way through it. Every bit as much a power as physical might or money. And I think he's part of his genius was seeing that, even though I'm not sure he was a believer, and it always seemed very cynical. But the people in it always seemed very sincere in that fashion.
Yeah, even in that though, like you are correct that there was a genius in seeing the importance of religious belief, but I think in ignoring the real power of religion, the fact that prayer does work, right, misses a
Yep.
part of the paradigm here. Like C.S. Lewis does a brilliant job presenting this idea when in the book Till We Have Faces. I don't know if you've read it or not. I highly recommend it. I know John C. Wright's not a fan of it personally. I think it's genius. So yeah, uh, it's one of Lewis's best books, if not his best book. In the book, there is a cult of Ishtar, I believe, who is also identified with Aphrodite. I might be remembering the god, but I know she's also identified with Aphrodite, like a love goddess, right? Some sort of love goddess. And the main character, Orual, has a mentor called the Fox, who is a Greek, and he is presented as like a Greek philosopher type who doesn't believe in the gods or the power of the gods. That he's way too rational, right, to believe in the gods. He's a positive character overall, right? He's presented very positively in the narrative, but the priest of Ishtar goes, and they don't really believe it either. They're, he says, like they're just, power of suggestion and things like that. Well, there is a scene in the book where Aruel has kind of believed the fox's teachings, and then she meets a priest of Ishtar, and
Mm.
she threatens him, and he is and someone else threatens him as well, and he does not blink and stares them down, and says, "You have no idea, like what you're." Yeah, what you're trying to fight against, who you're fighting against. And then she says, and that's when I realized that the fox was completely wrong, right? That he very much believed in this power, and not only did he believe in it, he was convinced that it was going to enact something very real and very strong soon. And
Right.
like what the priest says will come true does come true, right? Like I forget what it is in the book. I haven't read it in a bit. I'll have to reread it, but basically the idea here is I think that there is more to even pagan religious belief
Hmm.
than this idea of like, oh, the prayer doesn't work. Well, we know in the Bible that some of this prayer does work,
Yeah,
right?
sometimes black magic seems to
Yeah,
work. It still
we
shouldn't
had
be
this
done.
conversation.
Right.
Right, exactly. But we had this conversation about it recently in a Bible study where with the Witch of Endor, right?
Hmm.
Uh Saul uses the Witch of Endor, and what the Witch of Endor tries to do works, right? Like, so we know that the Bible is indicating this stuff can work. Religious belief can work. Now, a lot of it is praying to demons. Saint Augustine theorizes, and I want to mention, like, he is theorizing that in certain rare circumstances, that the prayers can sometimes be attributed to angels who will sometimes help them, though he stresses that worship should not be given to them.
Hmm.
Uh, but Augustine theorized that a lot of the times, and probably most of the time, it's demons. Very occasionally, for quote unquote good prayers, right? It could be angels. Chesterton makes a distinction between what he calls, I think, like the household gods of the Romans versus the truly pagan gods of the Carthaginians, who are in actuality people like the Phoenicians, who are the people who worship beings like Moloch. Yeah, and
Right.
he said, I believe Chesterton says if there's anything we can admire in our ancestors, it's because Rome won out over Carthage, right? Like then, and that's the reason that there's anything we could admire. So there is a difference between these gods, right?
He was like, they didn't use enough salt. Okay.
Yeah, a little bit. Not salt. Yeah, yeah, didn't salt it enough.
It's a salty
Uh,
comment.
I mean, part of the problem with this is that we actually don't really know what Carthage's real beliefs were, because a lot of that data was wiped out by the Romans. And there's also the fact that I think it's questionable to call the Romans like the quote unquote good guys in any meaningful sense of that war.
Right.
I'm not sure there really were good guys in the Punic Wars. Uh, like
Well,
There's
this is
there's a
say,
lot of
no.
anecdotal
Hold on.
evidence. They sacrificed lots of babies to Moloch and kids.
And
true,
there's
but when the Romans object to this, they don't really object to it on the grounds of how evil it is that they sacrifice babies. It's more like they object to it on the grounds of how dumb are they that they think this will actually work. Uh, like they don't really have a moral objection to the killing of
No,
kids.
it
I
was a
mean,
power
they'll do it
struggle.
themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
they'll
was
do
who
it
was going to
themselves.
control the Mediterranean.
Yeah, like the Romans will do it themselves, and they have done it, just not at the level of the Carthaginians.
Yeah, it's
When
leave
they
kids
talk
out
about it,
for the nature spirits to adopt, i.e., die of exposure.
yeah, when Rome talks about Carthage's infant sacrifice, which we know was at a very very high, and they criticize it, it's always with this more bafflement than outrage, right? Of like, wow, that's really strange that they do this. I don't know what they think it will accomplish, you know. And then meanwhile, they're like, well, we gotta sacrifice, they'll sacrifice babies. They're like, obviously, we're not gonna sacrifice all, thousands of children. That would be absurd, right? Like,
Just a
we'll
100.
only, right, we'll only sacrifice a couple, or,
Right.
and only in very rare circumstances.
we're
Uh,
losing the war.
It's it's
yep,
interesting, this take on um spirits turning out to be real, and rights and all of this. Another one that comes to mind is Deep Space Nine. So for a while, Star Trek has kind of skirted around religion, or it would always turn out to be something like people worshiping a computer or something dumb like that. And then along comes Deep Space Nine, and the prophets of the Bajoran turn out to actually be these spiritual entities that are benevolent, that live in the wormhole, and the paw wraiths turn out to be the outcasts of these beings and will possess people, and their eyes will glow red, okay, and all of this stuff. And I mean, they just kind of end up rolling with it. Like Captain Cisco's like, well, I guess I'm a prophet then, right? But it's it it slid very easily into the entire thing, and they touched on things they wouldn't have didn't bother with earlier, like, oh look, the Klingons have a religion, they have Tovakor, and they believe they killed their gods, and the even the Ferengi, mercantile as they are, believe you have to buy your way into heaven, and so they're saving up, and they're serious about it. Even the Jem'Hadar, which with their religious fanaticism for the masters, the shape changers, and it makes it all come alive in a way that I think Next Generation seemed like two-dimensional in comparison.
yeah. I'm thinking this over. Like going back to the Punic Wars and what that all meant. Like I could hear Ben was about to argue with me that there wasn't a clear bad guy, but I would stand by that. I think. Uh, so
Well,
the thing
so
about
here's my statement on that.
yeah,
Civilizationally, our forefathers are the Romans.
yes,
They were clearly given a mandate to conquer the world and to make it so that the gospel could spread very easily throughout their lands, and of course spread out into the world at large. Because you do have to have anchoring mega empires like Rome and China and stuff like that
So,
to have, hold to have things like trade routes of sufficient size and necessity that people can easily, relatively easily, spread out throughout the world to spread the gospel. I do not believe that if things were a bunch of shattered petty kingdoms, that God's will could be accomplished. Therefore,
so
oh, yeah.
sorry, you can finish your point.
Therefore, because of the purposes God had for the Roman Empire, they are as good of a good guy that we can accept. While we might say, yeah, some of the causes of the Third Punic War were bullshit, and they were just looking to destroy Carthage for the final time, Carthage were as much of an asshole as everyone else, and they're the ones who have, we've discovered like fields of baby bones in certain locations with certain ritual marks on them. Like the scene from the end of Many Splendored Dreamland, I think it's that one or the third one, from Rachel Griffin's series, is not some imagination of Jaji's. It's a real thing, and it's just a field of baby bones. Like it's a whole bunch of just dead children. Like
Oh,
we can
yeah,
be
I know what
Roma
you're talking
boos
about.
about it, but like in reality, one side was forcing mothers to give up their children and punishing them if they wept while their children were being destroyed. And the other side was not doing that. Sure, they had their evil things because they were pagan as well, but it's like one of those things where it's just different. It's different in how it sets up and how it falls out. Like we can't say that everyone was evil in the past. Who do we look up to? I don't want it. Like one of the things I found myself is that I've given up some opportunities just because I've decided that this isn't exactly give an excuse. Why should a man grasp for money? And then it's like, wait a minute, I'm poor. Like we can say it is moral to be not grasping for money, but at the same time, when God says the poor will be with you always, He doesn't mean explicitly make yourself poor without a deliberate reason given to you by God Himself. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
So it makes sense, but I'm gonna push back on a little bit of it.
Sure.
First off, while I agree with you that God definitely used the Roman Empire to spread the Christian religion, it's one of the reasons that Jesus incarnated when he did. It always makes me laugh when people go like, "What?" You hear that line in like "Jesus Christ Superstar." Why did you do it here and not some other time? As if like Christianity doesn't have billions and billions of members. And it's like where
Right.
when, yeah, it's like when exactly would you have gotten more Christians than now? Like what would have worked better than when he came? But whatever, that's neither here nor there. That's a bit of a non sequitur. But what I'm getting at with Rome though is yes, I agree that God used it for that reason. However, that on its own does not give us any license to look to them morally. Like, let me give you an example here. Judas is absolutely a part of the divine plan. It is
Yes.
unequivocal. It is very clear. Jesus states this. He was planned from the beginning to be there. Judas is also given absolute and full blame for what he did,
Yes.
right? He is blamed for it. He is not to be admired for it. You are not supposed to be sympathetic to him for it. It's one of the little editorial bits in the Gospels that makes it very clear that in times when Judas might seem sympathetic, like he's making a valid point, John wants you to know that Judas is lying, right? Like he
Hmm.
adds it as an editorial. Like Judas is not concerned about the poor; he's stealing money. He is lying, right?
Right.
Uh, and Jesus is very clear about the fact that even though Judas was part of the divine plan from the beginning. Nevertheless, he is culpable for the decisions that he makes.
Yeah, he freely
So,
chose that, and
right.
what's more, he knew better. He was seeing the miracles all left and right, and it 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 boggles that he could choose to do what he did, but he did.
As a side note, that's one of the reasons that this latest season of The Chosen, we've had streams on it before, right, about The Chosen. It's like, yes, I am in favor of it as a Catholic and somebody who is educated on on scripture, who knows my stuff. I do not have an issue with The Chosen so long as it is acknowledged as fiction, historical Bible-based fiction, and not as like the Bible itself. Uh, and this season of The Chosen, I think one of its great achievements was making Judas sympathetic without changing the story, right? Because there's a certain sympathy to Judas, right? In that,
Mm.
number one, you don't join the apostles if your goal is to get rich. It doesn't make any
Right.
sense. So we can assume that when he first joined, it was probably not under false pretenses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something happened that changed him. And number two, he does show regret later. Now, the regret was a selfish regret that refused to face consequences and that refused real repentance.
Mm.
He dies instead of properly repenting the way that Peter does. Peter doesn't die. Peter goes, has a conversation with Jesus, right? But all of that, whatever. Uh, However, there is a certain sympathy attached there. It's just that I don't, you can't change the narrative. Like what Jesus Christ Superstar does is it's very simple. All they do is take out that little editorial from John where he says, "Oh, by the way, Judas was stealing the money." Well,
Yep.
if you take that bit out, then Judas is obviously sympathetic in that scene, right?
Yeah.
The Chosen does not take it out. But what they do instead is they make it that Judas is waiting for the Messiah to enact this kingdom on earth, to start a new Israeli kingdom. And the other
Which he
and
was, I think. Wasn't he part of the Zealots?
no,
I thought
that's
that was
Simon.
Simon.
Simon
Oh,
Zelotes.
never mind.
Yeah, Judas was not one of the but Judas is they make it in The Chosen that Judas is trying to start is waiting for Jesus to start the new Israeli kingdom, and he thinks that the other apostles aren't getting that this is why Jesus is here, and they are spending too much of the money, so he starts pocketing it under this theory that, well, when Jesus finally does start the kingdom, I'll have saved up, the treasury fund for him, right? I'll have saved up some of the treasury fund for him, which I actually think is a plausible way to go about it, because again, I think that Judas really didn't join the apostles under false pretenses, because it doesn't make sense if he did, right?
Right.
Like it's
Right.
not a group that you would join under false pretenses. So doing in that way, I think, is a smart way of making him sympathetic. Like I understand why he's doing it without making him right. Like he is definitely wrong. He is definitely a traitor, right? But I understand the thought process that led from A to B.
I'm
Anyway,
always boggled by it. The standard thing is he did it for money, but it's hard to believe. I also assumed he kind of became more like, you know, he definitely had the personality of like I'm gonna do it right. I'm smarter than everyone else is. He tried to
well, I
tell
think there's a
Jesus
certain
Christ what to
jaded,
do.
yeah,
Um,
there's a certain jadedness that happens. You join these apostles, you see this miracle worker, and you're
mhm,
waiting and waiting and waiting for him to do what the Messiah is supposed to do. And instead of doing that, he just seems to put himself into danger constantly until finally he dies. And sure,
right,
you're the reason he dies to an extent, but honestly, it was heading that way anyway. And it doesn't seem like he's doing it, right? So I can sort
right.
of, I, I, I don't want, there's no sympathy for Judas in the sense of like,
Well, he didn't actually
uh,
repent.
yeah,
Who
Judas,
knows? He might
he
even
did
have been
literally
possible
the
for him to
worst.
repent even at that point. He was still alive, but he
Yeah,
didn't. He
Judas did
committed
literally
suicide
the
instead.
right. Judas did literally the worst thing that anybody has ever done in the history of all time. Uh, so considering that, you got to be careful with the level of sympathy that you have for Judas.
Mm.
Uh,
I read this great book called Paradise Lost, and this devil guy,
oh, I've heard of that book.
this devil guy, he talks a lot of sense sometimes. No, uh, the
Oh.
no, like, and I don't want to argue that the Romans were of a Christian virtue, but I will say that if I were to live under any other sort of world system, I would rather live under the Roman system than any other I can think of. I mean, can you imagine some sort of civilization like China, where
Yeah,
you're cannibalized just because
probably
you're
agree.
in proximity to a sieging castle? Like it's
Probably cop to that. Yes.
yeah. So it's
Uh,
it's like I root for them because they're the best of their time, and they're the virtues that they aspired to when they were virtuous are of the absolute highest caliber. They
yes.
are the people who whose philosophers thought up God, not thought up God like created him or anything ridiculous like that, but in the sense of, oh yeah, no, there is a God above all, who we
Well,
should worship.
no, that was Greek, not Roman.
They're of the same system. There's very little
Mm,
difference between the Greeks and the Romans.
yeah,
Then
because the
then the
Romans conquered
Romaboos
Greece.
freak out, like, no, they were actually from Troy.
I mean, they were, but so is my family. I'm British, as you know, David. Half British, half American, all Roman.
Right?
The
I mean, we had to pick up ruling the waves after the British Empire was done with it, so
yeah,
I'm the one
we picked
Italian
that up.
here, and I'm the least Roman of all of us.
yes,
Uh,
we know. Uh,
uh, no, I'm just kidding. I'm Catholic, so I'm actually the only one who's part of the only remaining Roman Empire left.
that's right.
Uh, yeah,
It's true.
uh, no, going back to the topic. Yeah, no, I see your point. Uh, it's one of the reasons I admire Alexander. Like, it's interesting. Do you know Dan Carlin of Hardcore History?
Yes,
Uh, went viral a while ago. I do not know for sure his political leanings. I've never looked into it. I don't know if he's respected among the right or the left or whatever, but I
he
do
is
find him
respected among the
entertaining
right.
sometimes. Is he? Okay.
Yes.
I do find him entertaining sometimes. However, there are some things he says that I don't entirely agree with. And one of them, he was going on trying to make the point that, like, when we admire conquerors, we're doing it with the context of we weren't there, right? Like,
Yeah.
we weren't one of the people who were conquered. Well, I agree with this to a point. He made some comment about Alexander the Great where it was more in passing than anything, but I didn't agree with it, where he basically said that, like, when you talk about Alexander the Great spreading Greek culture, this is in the context of him killing everyone else there. It's like, no, that's not actually true, though.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Like, number one, Alexander the Great was absolutely intentional about it. Like, it's really wrong to say that it was only an incidental part of what he did. It was very much an overt goal of Alexander the Great's to spread Greek culture.
Mhm.
Right?
Right.
He absolutely wanted to do that. Uh, and number two, just generally speaking, as far as conquerors go, Alexander was one of the less brutal ones. Now,
Yeah.
it's like you were saying, you have to look at this all in the context of the time periods, right? Being
Right,
a
you're still ancient
conqueror,
world. Yeah.
yeah. Being a conqueror was not in itself seen as something that necessarily made you morally reprehensible. Xerxes is a great example of this. He was not seen, even by the Greeks, as morally reprehensible. This is a creation of the 300 movie,
Yeah.
right? The Greeks at the time actually respected Xerxes quite a bit. He was seen as, if anything, a worthy opponent, right?
Right.
That's how they talk about him. That's how he was viewed. Does that mean that it's okay? They were just going to let him walk all over them?
But
No.
Anthony, I thought the movie 300 was rigid history.
It
I
is,
know.
but they
Fully faithful.
exaggerated him a bit.
So 300 absolutely fascinates me because of the way that it presents history. It's like everything that it presents happened in and is a real event, but like the opposite of the way that it shows it. I don't know how to explain
It's
this.
like the creators of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure got a hold of real history.
That is way, way better than that works way better than I expected it to. Wow. Uh uh wow. Wow. I am not gonna look at that movie the same way again.
So
Uh
you're approaching me.
Suddenly it
That's
all
right.
makes sense now.
oh, you're approaching me, Xerxes? Or no, Leonidas? I
I can't
I
hit you
can't
with
be
my spear unless I get closer. Oh, then come as close as you want
Why am I not stepping down the stairs?
then. What's wrong, Xerxes? If you think you can defeat me, you can just step down those stairs.
I am Xerxes, Emperor of the world.
I've seen a couple of memes like that. They're all gold.
That's fantastic. But no, going back to like conquerors were not necessarily viewed in an entirely negative light. Not even the Bible views conquerors in an entirely negative light. Some conquerors are viewed much more negatively than others. Cyrus the Great is straight up given the title of Messiah, right? Like
Yep.
remembering that Messiah is a translation of the phrase anointed one.
Mhm.
And there were several anointed ones before the anointed one, the prophesied anointed one, right? Who is the
Mhm.
Christ. Cyrus is the only Gentile king who is referred to, and I think he's the only Gentile in the entire Bible, actually, who is referred to as anointed one, because he says, I think we actually had this reading today, right? We had this reading today at church, that Cyrus had a vision from God or like a message from God to rebuild the Jerusalem temple, and he does it. Yeah. So he's referred to as one of the anointed ones of God. So even in the Old Testament, like conquerors are not universally and automatically seen as immoral, right? And going through like the various Old Testament conquerors, Alexander the Great, who is mentioned in the Old Testament and somewhat negatively, because he conquers Jerusalem at some point, I think. I could be misremembering this, and whatever. He's referred to somewhat negatively, but certainly not the most negative conquerors. And when you consider who Alexander was, like, I am a big admirer of Alexander, a very big admirer. He's one of my he's on the short list of favorite historical figures. Yeah, and Alexander the Great. What I like about him, first off, is that he basically he was one of those once in a generation type change the world sort of people that's basically impossible to deny. Actually did everything that they said they were going to do, right? Even though people will try. I mean, he was the son of another great man. Only instead of being a nepo baby, which is the majority of children of great men, he took that opportunity and built on it in the most glorious way that he could. Uh, Teaming up with his best friend Hephaestion, and getting tutored by the greatest mind of the age, Aristotle, mastering his virtues and mastering himself, and using that. And he uses. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by people talking in the background, and it's interrupting my train of thought. Uh, so he is using that opportunity that he's been given to push himself forward and make himself greater, right? And
Yes.
when he conquers, he does not conquer with a bloodlust. That's the best way I could explain this, right? For example, Darius. This is what I mean by the fact that like just being an enemy at the time was not enough to make you necessarily evil. Sometimes it did. Don't get me wrong. The Romans absolutely like they painted the Carthaginians as black as you could. They hated Hannibal. Although with that said, the smarter Romans respected Hannibal, like Marcus Scipio, who finally defeated him, right?
Hmm.
He respected Hannibal greatly. Uh but Alexander, when he fought Darius, Darius was a great example of, to him, a worthy opponent. You get this amazing story of Alexander. The reason that I consider Alexander to be probably the greatest general in history is that most of the time when you read stories about winning against overwhelming odds, it's a defending force fighting an attacking force, right? Alexander was winning with overwhelming odds when he was the attacking force. Uh, right?
Right.
So he was going in with less men, right? And being the underdog in these fights into these massive empires, and he was winning over and over and over again. He basically never lost, right? And finally, Darius, who has been defeated by Alexander multiple times at this point, famously sends Alexander a letter. This is one of my favorite stories in history. He sends him a letter where he compliments him, sucks up to Alexander a bit, and then says to him something along the lines of, "Oh, uh, you can have half of the empire right now, no strings attached. You get half, I get half. We call it, and we end the fighting here. What do you say?" Well, this is a serious enough offer that Alexander calls like a war meeting to discuss it, right? Invites all of his generals and then says, "What do you think? Should we accept the offer?" And one of his men, in this one liner so good, one of his men says, "Were I Alexander, I would take the offer." And Alexander looks at him and says, "And that is why you are not Alexander." Uh,
Oof.
and which is such a burn. And Alexander does not take the offer. He wins, once again outnumbered, by the way. He wins again with a genius battle plan. Darius does manage to escape the battle, and Darius is murdered by his second in command. Now, Alexander, at this point, he's basically already won. Darius had this plan of maybe he was going to, like, unite the governors and try and counterattack, but, it was all but over. But this guy now is the new head of the remainder of the Persian Empire. Interestingly enough, when Alexander hears about the death of Darius, and by the way, he has already conquered Darius's court. His mother is like under Greek protection. His wife is under Greek, right? Like Darius's court is under the Greeks now. Uh, when Alexander hears that Darius has been murdered, assassinated, he is furious about this because in Alexander's mind, Darius was a worthy foe, right? He was a worthy opponent who had been killed by treachery. So when Alexander does finally catch the man who killed Darius, uh, he has him assassinated. He kills him. He doesn't like he kills him outright and declares himself king. He does not offer him any quarter. He kills him as a traitor. I believe he actually holds a trial for treachery and convicts him as a traitor for killing Darius because Alexander had a sense of honor. He did not have any hatred towards the people he conquered. In fact, he treated them fairly well, again, for the standards of the time, right? He would conquer them, and then they would have to pay tribute, and they would need to declare their loyalty to him, and if they did, they could live their lives, right?
Yep.
He had no bloodlust. He just wanted to conquer. He just wanted to be the man in charge. When he finally dies, it is of an illness, and he inspires his men to go down to India. At one point, he manages to end the treachery by giving a speech, which is amazing. Uh, his men are literally about to betray him and go home and stop fighting until Alexander stands in front of them, strips off his shirt, and shows them the wounds on his chest to prove that he did not run away from battle but fought on the front lines with them. Uh, it's one of the reasons, going back to Legend of the Galactic Heroes, Lowengram, unlike Yang Wen Li in Legend of the Galactic Heroes, who was almost certainly based on Yi Sun Sin, uh, the Korean admiral who defeated the Japanese Empire against impossible odds. Uh, he was probably pretty directly based on him. Lowengram, who was the counterpart to him, the Empire's leader, the Emperor Lowengram, was probably not based on any one person, but if there is one historical figure who he had more similarities to than any other, it was Alexander, right? First, he made a point of fighting at the front of every battle that he took part in to make the point that he did not ask his men to do anything that he wouldn't do, which is something that Alexander also took pride in, right? Alexander fought in his battles. He did not lead from behind the ask his men to do things that they wouldn't do. In the ancient world, this was something that was extremely important, and you will see it with the great generals. Hannibal was the same way. Hannibal was able to inspire such loyalty among his men because he would fight with them, right? He would
Right.
not lead from behind the lines. That's how he was able to lead mercenaries decades in foreign territory. Because they knew that he was not asking them anything that he was not willing to do himself. Alexander was the same way. Lowengram in Legend of the Galactic Heroes makes a point of this. Also, Lowengram has a best friend who he is very close to, who, when he dies in the show, Lowengram collapses for days and is distraught, and it completely changes his outlook on life. This also happens to Alexander. Uh, I watched, by the way, Leather Apron Club. If you don't know him, you should know him. He has a great YouTube channel.
A 10 out
A
of
lot
10
of
channel.
it is. It's fantastic. He just did a video on Alexander the Great, this was a video that I actually didn't need. He didn't add anything that I appreciated existing. If you ever hear somebody say that Alexander the Great is gay, like in the new Netflix documentary, this is absolute libel. It is a complete lie. It is untrue, right? There is, or more to be more specific about it, we have literally no evidence of this, right? There is zero evidence that Alexander the Great is gay. As he said, you're probably wondering where this theory came from. He goes, and I promise you, I am not making this up. Literally where the theory comes from, because he got really, really upset when his best friend died. And that is where the entire theory comes from. He goes, and this raises the question, how upset are men allowed to be at funerals before you think they're gay? He's like, and he goes, this just, it raises that question
We
though, right?
have a modern society that doesn't understand deep friendship anymore. It's a shallow, vapid society. And the idea of what went on during the Middle Ages and the ancient world of deep friendships and abiding loyalty and love for one's king or one's noble or whatever it happens to be falls uselessly at most people's feet. They don't even understand it, because the idea of a deep connection outside of your family is now almost unknown, it seems.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And this is true among us as well. Like,
Hmm.
I don't mean to exempt myself from this, right? Modern society can understand, even today, they can understand romance to an extent, right? Like
Hmm.
I know what you're going to say, and I completely know why you would say it. However, what I mean by this is the fact that we still tell stories of romance where we recognize the importance of romance, right?
Sure.
Of erotic, what we would call eros, right? Erotic, like, and I mean this very seriously. This is not, I'm not memeing erotic love, right?
Yes.
Of the four loves, we
Yes.
understand erotic love to an extent. Now, we
Yes.
pervert it in various ways, but there are, nevertheless, we as a society have not forgotten its importance entirely. What we do not understand as a society at all is philia. You know, I don't even think there is a word for it because we basically never use it. We'll call it philotic love, right? Uh, to be frank, there is almost no philia in modern society, right? The only places it probably still exists to a point is in the military. In the military, philotic relationships probably can and do form. Uh, Outside of
Explain
the
what you mean by
military,
philotic.
philotic as in they represent philios, true deep friendship.
Right.
Uh,
What? So
Samwise and
yeah.
Frodo in Lord of the Rings captures this well, and it's again why people assume this is a homosexual relationship when
Right.
it's nothing of the
Correct.
sort. It is, they are. I have heard the closest example. I've had some people who didn't understand what they were reaching for would say brother soulmate or something like that, which is like maybe a way to describe it. Deep friendship where both are putting the concern of the other ahead of their own pretty much all
Right.
the
They're
time.
coming up with different terms for something that we've already had a term for, that we already know exists. It's what fuels these misunderstandings of the Iliad. Leather Apron Club talks about this as well. He says, I'm convinced that people who think that the Iliad is about a homosexual relationship between Achilles and Patroclus have never actually read the Iliad. Now, it is true that Plato theorized homosexuality in the Iliad, but frankly, Plato liked to theorize about a lot of strange things that are really very obviously wrong, and sometimes you're not supposed to take his theories super seriously.
Right.
Uh,
It
I
comes
would
down
shock.
to Plato said a lot of crap. Don't worry
Yeah,
about it.
I would put this in that category, and I agree with Leather Apron Club. Anybody who says that there's homosexuality in the Iliad, I think has not read it very closely. I would agree. In fact, has not really read it at all, because the entire premise of the story is that Achilles is mad that his bride price has been stolen from him by Agamemnon. And this makes him so angry, he nearly murders him on the spot until Athena stops him. Right? Like, that is the
Yes.
entire premise of the Iliad. And then, yes, Achilles loses his mind when Patroclus dies. However, once again, this raises the question that Leather Apron Club asked in the Alexander video, which is, how upset do you need to be when your closest friend dies before they call you gay? Right?
Right.
Like, how upset are men allowed to be when their closest friend, right? The man
Right.
who is closer to them than anything in the world, who would die for you, right?
Right.
Who has fought for you, has put their life on the line for you, when he dies, when are you too upset at his death? At what
I'm
point was it
Listen,
moved to
I'm
gay?
I absolutely agree. And quite frankly, I think this is one of the core reasons why if we take our society and throw it to the future, we our society could not maintain not fast and light, sorry, could not maintain quote unquote space lane space travel in
No.
the less than faster than light because they cannot comprehend love and they can't comprehend honor. Quite frankly, there are some people out there that if they are murdered, if I was not Christian, I would be honor bound to slay them, to find them and to kill them and even kill them publicly. The murderers of my friends, and of course my family goes without saying, but there's, like these people who make these series, they are degenerate, porn addled sex freaks who could not win a uh, arm uh, arm wrestling competition if it would save their lives. They have not met the physical world in any real regard. If somebody disagrees with them, they go, "Ha ha, yeah, that's just a theory," and it's all this other things like they're weak. They're not people who can speak. Like they don't have any tumos. They can't fight. And even if though it's not a scholar's point to be fighting fit the same way a fighter or a gladiator would be, they still have a responsibility to defend their arguments in a way that is both strident and powerful. You know, it it uh, you know, even when it comes from guys on our side, it's like, there's some people I know who are writing spiritual things and stuff like that and historical things, and I look at them and it's like, could you, like, I know you're thinner than me, but could you please put some muscles on so you have a bit of a thing to you. There's a lack of the ability to live in the physical world, and I don't like it. uh
I
you
see
know
what you mean. Like, yeah,
Mhm.
the Greeks in many things took almost everything to an extreme,
yeah.
but they understood that the intellectual and the physical world were not entirely separated.
Right.
And if you're unhealthy and you don't take care of yourself, it's going to affect your mind
That's right.
and it's going to affect the products of your mind.
And
I'm also
it's
pretty sure that Plato was Plato's wrestling show name,
yeah, it was. We're
which is
pretty
really
sure of that.
funny.
So in other words, he like, says, "You know what? I've got a theory." Oh, what's that, Plato? What theory do you have? And he's got like somebody else in an arm lock or something like that.
I'm
Oh,
pretty sure Diogenes won the mic wars, though.
he always did. He comes on
But
like a heel. Oh,
I
Plato,
swear, I
you
always
say
thought
what a
of the
man is, and he just holds up a chicken. This is a
yes.
man, and he hits him with it. What about your man? And like Plato, like falls to the ground while the crowd cheers.
If you've ever read the Frank Miller, The Dark Knight Rises, I always imagined the Diogenes Plato relationship to be like Batman and Superman, where Plato is Superman and he would casually talk about, and he would talk about Diogenes like, we disagree on a lot of things, but I really have a lot of respect for him, right? Like,
Yeah,
he
Hmm.
makes some good points. I understand. We don't agree on a lot. And then Diogenes is Batman going, fuck that blue tighted pussy. Uh,
Just the
just
backhand.
right.
right.
Going like, yeah, he goes, that blue tided pussy thinks he's better than me. It's like, well, fuck that guy. He doesn't know shit. And
I
meanwhile,
As
I
he's
really
naked and sitting in a
like
barrel.
I
yes,
really like Frank Miller's take on Superman in there. That's really a story about Batman, but his take on Superman's fascinating because in a way it kind of harkens back to the original idea for Superman. Okay, he was written almost like he's like a science fiction version of an angel. Okay, I mean his name is Kal-El. Okay, even
Sure.
and he's there, and it's clear he's that Superman slash Clark is almost baffled with human violence and is trying to keep it all to a limit. And even as he's dying in nuclear fire, he's like worried about the smallest life around him. And there's this scene where, Batman's like still talking Clark and they're fighting. You always knew just what to say. And, again, he's going on about how tough and gritty it is on the streets. And Superman's just like, Bruce, I just broke 3 of your ribs. Please stop. Like he's holding back as much as he can.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, he's a product of a different world, and personally, I think, uh, yeah, product of a different world. But
I
it's
mean,
also of a different philosophy, a sort of altruism that, again, we just don't have.
sure,
And they
but
can't even replicate it in the media they make about him.
now
Uh,
today, forget it. No one could write that book.
oh, yeah.
But you've got like, and it's being raved at because people can't understand it and scream at that which they can't understand.
Yep.
But um, if you were wondering like what I guess it it's a superhero book and he's a space alien. But that aside, I think if you were looking at what the perspective of the world from a warrior angel might be like, it might be something like that, right? Like
Yeah.
a truly moral superior being who's just trying to help and looking at us with all the mess that we have. Like still a limited being, right?
Sure.
But yeah, because there's almost this sense of bafflement of like, why are they doing this?
And there's like they have to explain why Krypton, which is a race of supermen, uh, provided that they have the right kind of sunlight, why Krypton didn't just conquer the universe.
Yeah, why didn't
Uh,
you guys go to another planet around a yellow star?
right,
Preferably one that's not going to blow up. Just
right.
saying.
It turns
But
out it only
anyway,
takes about 20 years to power up enough to move planets around. I'm pretty sure you guys could figure it out because you also had hyperdrives.
yeah,
There's some questions that you can't really look at too hard. Another one being is that what sort of moral system did they have? It's clear that guys like Zod were evil, but also, by what standard were they evil? Because they disrupted society and tried to take over, or because of, some other deeper standard that the Kryptonians held religiously?
And the Lady Ursula, who hatched a plot so sinister it threatened even the very children of Krypton.
Sure. I don't know. I'm just like slowly forgetting comic book lore, and I'm pretty happy about that.
You know what?
Uh,
I
Good.
can't blame you a bit.
Good.
I can't nerd rage the smallest bit, Ben. There's nothing you
So
can
here's the
do
thing.
to the genre that hasn't already been done to it.
Here's the thing. I consider most comics to be quite bad, with some rare exceptions. However, I sometimes enjoy looking at the Wikipedia pages for comic book characters because they're always, when you see it summarized without any of the context surrounding it, the context of a full story, right? Like going through the motions, it seems 10 times more insane. So you'll get things like Hellcat is like, yeah, she was originally a just like a slice of life comic for Marvel, and then they decided to turn her into a hero, and then eventually, and then she died like 3 times, went to hell, and now she's back, and that's the story. Or like, you read this about so many different characters, like so many of the Avengers have died like at least 3 times, and have come back to life so often, and it amuses me.
yeah. There's yeah. I do want to continue to talk about our main subject, and we'll probably do this next week because I'm not satisfied yet. Uh,
Very sad. No, thank you.
that's too bad. Uh, we've talked a lot about stuff, and I think we've talked more about Empire than we've talked about actual, the religious mechanics of space travel and why they're important. As a bit of contrast, while anytime an empire and kingdom falls apart, an empire and kingdom will, devolve into petty bickering across usually familial or racial lines. Um, you know, if that should happen in a space faring civilization, does that just immediately mean lights out? Congratulations, the people who ruled the space laser decided to use it on the planet, and guess what? The planet was able to send off a biobomb that wiped out the people on the space laser. Tau Ceti's dark, and they had 3 megaships combing the elliptical, sorry, the paralytic,
No, you had it the ecliptic.
the ecliptic. Thank you
The
very much.
Mhm.
And they are now lost. Because Tau said I was the last station on the list.
Ben, I
They
really want to read this book if you write it.
it's called Count to a Trillion. Well,
I know, but I want to read your version of whatever madness that you're writing because,
I
like,
do have some
I can
notes.
see it coming up in your head.
Well, it's fun because I actually make the ship captains part of the ship, so they're actually like super giants. And when they like marry somebody or whatever, they actually just create a clone of themselves that they share a mind with. So that they
I
both
will.
have their representative, being there, being like the wife or the husband or whatever, and having kids, while also, doing what they love best, which is plunging themselves into the darkness between the stars and hopefully not hitting a megagru. Uh,
Right? It is dark out there. There could be a
it's
group.
pretty dark. Uh, but no, I think this is worth talking about. So this will be a series for a little while until I'm satisfied.
Yay.
Partially because I do want to talk about Dune. It'll still be relevant
Hmm.
next week, I'm sure. I also
Hmm.
want to talk about a few other things, like the thing with Star Trek that does bother me in a little bit is ignoring the fact that yeah they don't really bring up their religion until what Deep Space Nine.
Hmm.
Um,
There are a few
it's
moments where they slip it out with a few of the writers.
yeah.
Um, and there's an absolutely amazing one. Uh, I went back to watch it. For whatever you may think of Shatner, I do believe he's a believer because there's this scene where he's castigating Apollo to his face, like the Apollo.
Hmm.
Okay. And he's like, we're beyond you now. We don't need gods. except for the one. And I'm sure he slipped that in. He's like, no, I'm not going to deny God in front of like a billion people. Sorry,
Right.
pal.
And I couldn't tell you what these guys thought. I'm sure that Roddenberry was Episcopalian of some kind. But
Roddenberry's
it's
an atheist.
Roddenberry's an atheist. Okay, I might be thinking of someone else then. There were a decent
There was
amount of
stuff he couldn't get
Episcopalians.
away with until he did Next Generation, which was why the first year of Next Generation was completely flat.
Yeah.
Then Roddenberry went away, and suddenly, wow, there's life and story, and it's not just box checking social issues.
To be sure.
Right.
Uh, I could never make it past the first season. Uh,
Okay. I
but
got you.
but the what am I trying to say? The lack of any religious cohesion within a culture, makes things always very dissonant for me. Especially when watching, like early Next Generation or something. It's like why have the prime directive? What is the moral underpinning of these things? I do not give one crap about tax policy. I care about why people do the things that they do. And quite frankly, most people are not that deep. They have a
They
few
do it for a tax policy, Ben.
no.
There's a big write-off in
Are
space
you saying that
exploration.
you don't agree with George R. Martin when he wonders what Aragorn's tax policy is?
Aragorn's tax policy would clearly be just 10%, as any righteous king's would be. Uh, and even then, the king wouldn't set the tax policy; the individual lords and barons would. He doesn't know what he's talking about, even when he's criticizing something. Like, sure, the king might say, "Hey, I need money, and this is what the tax policy is," but in reality, he couldn't do more. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Uh, and there's also a question of congratulations, your empire is 17 light years away. How do you tax that when you have a travel time that's measured in
Oh,
decades?
there's absolutely no way.
There's no way. You
It's like if you get up to an astonishing 10 times the speed of light, like 1/10 the speed of light,
yeah.
which is stupidly vast.
Yep.
You're using antimatter or really powerful torch drives that we're just beginning to guess about. You're looking at almost 40 years to Alpha Centauri,
Yep.
which is right next door.
Yep.
You're looking at centuries to nearby stars.
Yep.
You're looking at thousands of years for any real distance in the galaxy. Not across the galaxy, just anything that would show up on a map of the galaxy.
Yep.
You don't do this as the Greater East India Trade Corporation. You don't do this as Halliburton. You don't do this as, how are we gonna float some bonds and we're just gonna pay off the star system afterwards? You can't. This is gonna be because of belief. The
Yep.
need to go out into space and explore, the need to set up a society according to your faith, the
Yep.
space missionaries, maybe. I don't know.
Well, oh, and there'll always be space missionaries.
Right.
But there's components to it that have to be met. If a man is ambitious, he must, follow through on his ambition or be wasted and useless and hate himself.
Hmm.
Therefore, if this man is ambitious, what can he spend his ambition on? I wouldn't necessarily say that no trade corporation would ever, take to the stars. I think that's actually one of the first ones that'll do it, uh, for the simple reason that they can send massive amounts of resources back
There's
home.
going to have to be some long-term bonds, buddy.
Oh, absolutely. Uh, but the real
Maybe the
kicker,
AI is running all the banks. Like they'll just be like, "Yes, we just wait long enough, and we will
eh,
recoup our."
I mean, yes, but unironically, yes. When you have, a time frame measured in decades, you just have to go like, yeah, all right. There'll probably be more AI work by then. But if you look at men like Hernan Cortez, why did Hernan Cortez spend his energy leaving Spain for the New World rather than fighting Muslims in North Africa? joining the
Well, he did that too, didn't he?
I don't think so. Could be
no.
Didn't
wrong.
he? Wasn't he a mercenary before he was a conquistador,
Let me double
an
check.
explorer? Because I'm pretty sure he had some serious military experience by the time he did what he did, which was a lot.
Yeah,
Um,
hold on.
he was
I'm
certainly
looking
not a
this up.
rank
So
amateur when it came to war.
he actually sent to he actually worked in Hispaniola and other places like that, and it looks like, let me see here. Yeah, he was basically put into the career working for things in the New World when he was young. Uh,
But
and
let's face it.
he started as a notary and some other things. But it's clear that he started some, military training and let me see here. Uh, yeah, no, he just worked as like clerks and notaries and stuff like that.
It's weird because he was
Uh,
pretty successful in fight. I was sure he had to have some military experience. All right.
hold on, when was he? How
Well, he
old
was
was he?
trained when he went over to the New World.
Yes.
But
Okay.
Sorry,
his real genius, yeah, he was a great he was a great general. The real genius of Hernan Cortez was
1485.
he rolled a nat 20 in charisma.
I mean, pretty much. He also he got a lot of 20s, man. Like he absolutely lucked out
Yeah.
at every point on the encounter tables. Um, so
Hold on, I'm trying to figure something out.
that's fine. I've totally been derailed as to where I was thinking too.
Yeah, he was 34 years old when he led the expedition into Mexico.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. There's
it
hope
was.
for me yet. But
Yep.
but
I don't know, Ben. If it's time to claim Mars for freedom, are you up for it?
strap me on
Ship's
the
leaving
ultimate
tomorrow.
strap me on the ultimate dragon pack we got from a shady
Right.
fireworks seller down the street. My body is ready. If we get enough of them, I'll make it to Mars. Just point me at the red dot in the sky, and I'll take care of myself.
And
Uh,
plant that flag and claim it for posterity.
exactly. What I'm planning on doing is putting PVC pipe through my sleeves, and
Hmm.
then kind of sort of tape weld the flag to my hands. So provided I survive reentry, I
Well,
will just
you're gonna
face plant
land.
into it.
You're gonna put the palace up on Olympus Mons because where else could it be, right? So
Exactly.
it's got thin atmosphere up there.
Okay, good. Yeah, that sounds survivable. I'll just put on a fishbowl helmet and a couple sweaters because space is cold.
It
Uh,
is.
it is.
Remember
But
to wear
no.
clean underwear.
Yeah, you've lit the fuse, and I'm like, wait a minute, I've forgotten something. Uh, no, but when Hernan Cortez went over to the New World, there was more than just, petty ambition. These men had, a very strong church behind them and a very high fervor of belief. They had just won out the wars against the Muslims and completed the Reconquista. That doesn't go away. Even when in our own times, it took many decades before the fervor of defeating the godless Nazis and whatever the faith of the common man were, the leadership was all godless. Uh, for that sort of fever pitch, which does come from fighting such a foe with
Hmm.
a spiritual populace, it took decades for that
Hmm.
to go away. We're still
Hmm.
dealing with fallout that can be directly connected to the spiritual movements that came out from the children of that time.
Hmm.
And we'll be dealing with the fallout for years later, God help us. Uh, you can't just say, there was nothing backing Cortez except guns, germs, and steel. The cross was backing Cortez as well, and that
Hmm.
was just as important as everything else, more so.
Oh yeah.
And that's
Mm.
where we're gonna end it tonight.
All
Uh,
right. Part one.
when has Ben ever satisfied? Ben is only satisfied when he can drink from the skulls of
Ben,
his
you
enemies.
you have to do
Absolutely.
your Space Empire book series. Like Yes, I know it was prefaced with Count to a Trillion, but he only really dealt with it in about 30 pages of the epic.
He dealt with it all the
It
time.
needs its own exploration.
All the
I love
time.
your idea of the living ships
It is one of the most important
that
parts
can
of that
fall in love
series.
with each other.
David,
The
I don't
what?
think we read the same books. The religious
We read
aspects
the
of it
same.
are all this
The
entire
oh
way
the
through.
religious aspects are entwined entirely throughout the thing. They
Okay,
end up bumping into angels for goodness sakes.
right.
The
Okay.
moon is a nun. Um,
Yes. I thought
Yeah,
you said it was only in like 30 something pages.
no,
Uh
but a lot of this, you've given this a level of thought and detail on it and put together that you just need to write, like you just need to like fess up and like write the outline for it now. Okay,
okay.
like write out the notes for what you want to do, find out where the missing spots are, research that, put together the outline. Like it's there, man. Yeah, I can tell it's alive in your mind.
So it is. It is. And what's funny is I have a pair of complete idiots as the main characters. So there's people like making Machiavellian schemes around them, and they're just like two star-crossed lovers having adventures. And
Mm,
so like there'll be a scene where like this certain character can has a spirit that burns around him because he has such tumos, it radiates from him like a heat. And then and that's how he tames the space phoenixes, which allow faster than light travel. And then
of
you
course.
have
I'm in. There's space phoenixes.
oh yeah,
Like,
I use
How
them to
else?
okay.
deliver pizzas the size of galaxies. No, I'm kidding, not galaxies, just solar systems. An extra large
Yeah,
for the
galaxies
being
would be
living in the
ridiculous.
sun. Uh,
Yeah, eventually the pizza does collapse under its own gravitation, much
well,
like we do when we eat too much pizza.
yeah, but that's like the extra special, sort of thing. It takes a lot of pepperoni to collapse pepperoni into a black hole.
Well, as
Let me
long
tell
as
you.
there's no pineapple on it, like.
Listen, the people want what the people want, and they're
But what if
paying
the
in
people want
plutonium.
heresy?
Well, that's why you have an inquisition.
Okay.
So the best statement about skulls of enemies and stuff like that is there was this one guy who he had he made some bad terrible take. It was an ugly take. It was a bad take, absolutely disgusting. Dumb, dumb, dumb. And it turns out the guy just doesn't have a neck. His skull flows through the fat holds into his shoulders, and of course he's bearded. And somebody, some poster, some friend, some frog, goes, "Come here, you Yakubian ape! I must measure your skull for science." And it's simply the best, the greatest comment of all time. I have never forgotten it. Uh, all right, guys. I promise that when I get my skull cup, I will use the best physiognomic techniques to ensure I have the biggest skull cup ever. If you believe you have a big head, please bring it forward for
And
measuring, and we'll go from there. All right, guys.
Anthony, we may or may not potentially have the thing he opened with, which was the space papacy, which does of course require a space pope if such happens. Thus, the only thing I would say is we at least get to call him space pope if he in fact
The
rules from
only
Tau
space
City.
probe. So the only space probe I could think of is at the end of the great sci-fi novel, A Canticle for Leibowitz, which is the
Hmm.
Catholic sci-fi novel, and I say this
Hmm.
knowing that John C. Wright exists.
Hmm.
And yet I would still say that A Canticle for Leibowitz is like the Catholic sci-fi novel.
Hmm.
So at the end of the book, which contains one of the great, I'm trying to think of how to put it, one of the great arguments, or I don't know if argument is even the right word, great tirades, jeremiads maybe is the right word,
Hmm.
against euthanasia ever written. Uh,
Hmm.
one of the bravest jeremiads against euthanasia ever written. The book ends with the entire world being destroyed by nuclear fire. Now, at this point in the narrative, we're far into the future and humanity has colonies around the stars. So the last few Catholics on Earth, the Pope has decided to stay on Earth, but they have elected a bishop who is going to go with a small group of Catholic monks and go into the stars. And this bishop is like the interim pope. So they have elected him to,
Right.
assuming that the pope, they never get contacted by the earthly pope again, he is to be treated as
He's like
the
acting pope. Yeah, that makes
right?
sense. And if
So it would
eventually
be
they'll come back and the Holy See won't be radioactive anymore and they can rebuild. That makes
right.
sense.
Or there's also the possibility that the Holy See, the Pope survived
Hmm.
on Earth somehow, because we don't really know who survives or not, right? Like
Hmm.
most people probably died, but also some people probably lived. Uh, so there's the possibility that the original Pope is still alive, which means that he's basically working as acting Pope, and there's going to be an
Oh
acting, an acting
man, then you have
succession.
succession.
Right, and
Do you
then
end up with
but
another schism at that point?
well, ideally, no. Ideally, what would
Hopefully they'd be
happen?
able to
This
get
is not
together,
explored
but
in the book at all, by the way.
right.
Ideally, what would happen is if you learned that the earthly papacy in fact survived,
Hmm.
which probably they didn't, but if they did, then you would immediately bow and give deference to the real pope, right?
That's
Uh,
never been a problem. You know what? I'm not going to go there.
oh, would that happen? Probably not,
Yeah.
but it should, right?
All
That's
right,
the
guys.
Right.
theory.
All right.
Yes,
Alrighty.
that's
We'll
the
close
theory.
her up.
Have a good night, guys.
Or
Check us in
part
again
two.
next week. Part
Dun,
two,
dun, dun,
where
dun, dun,
we'll
dun, 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 dun,
probably focus
dun.
more on
Na,
Dune,
na, na, na,
to
na.
appeal
Okay.
to the people. Probably.
I'm all up for sci-fi and religion, though we had a lot of fun with history as we often diverge. Take care all.